Welcome back to the third section on writing and publishing an academic paper. In this lesson, we're going to introduce you to the typical and classical structure of an academic paper, the usual model that 90% of the papers in most disciplines follow. We will answer this big question: how do you build an academic paper? As we begin, it's important to understand that there are some generic building blocks you will find in almost every paper. Those are title, abstract, introduction, literature review, methodology, results, discussion, and conclusion. Starting at the beginning, let's remember that there's a title, and it's an important element as the very first introduction to your paper. Strive to keep it simple, clear, short, displaying all the key concepts, straight to the point, and powerful. Following the title, most times there is an abstract, which synthesizes the main points of the paper. We'll dig into abstract more in an upcoming lesson, but realize that the abstract really is probably one of the most important parts of your paper. It shows what you achieved. Think of it as the showcase of your paper. When it's read, the reader should know exactly what the paper is about and what the author contributed. Also, in it, the reader will find some keywords that will classify your paper and help reference it. Make sure to think hard about the right strategy keywords to include. After the title and abstract, the actual paper begins with an introduction, which should find a balance between saying everything and keeping some mystery about your research. That can be a difficult task, but we will provide some more guidance on specifically how to achieve it in an upcoming lesson. The most important point here is to remember that your goal is to identify fast and clearly the research question. It's also very helpful to finish your introduction with a clear outline paragraph. In this paragraph, you will describe exactly what you do in each section of the paper. To help accomplish that, the paragraph often begins with the phrase, "The paper is structured as follows." The next section of the paper usually deals with your literature review. This part is not to be exhaustive explaining every detail of your review of the literature. Instead, your goal is to present just what's needed to get to the research question. You have to show the limits of previous research to justify the necessity of your own work. Remember, we discussed the frontier and the gap in Section 2. That's what we're dealing with here. If you're preparing an empirical paper, the next element might include a methodology section where you basically explain your research design, explaining perhaps whether you're in chemistry, management, sociology, etc. Depending on your discipline and the specific journal you're preparing your paper for, this methodology section could also be located at the end of your paper or even in the appendix, so it's very important to know the rules. Keep in mind that this methodology section is where you justify how you proceed with your research. You'll explain why the research is relevant. Also, why it has to be conducted in very specific ways, and so on. In some journals, you may be required to be very thorough. In some, maybe less so. For instance, if you're doing a case study, you'll want to justify why a single case or a multiple case is best, why the field you chose is significant, and how you will derive general principles from it. This is the research design. You also need to describe the way you collected data or the way you built your experiment. Explain when, how, and to what purpose. All these questions have to be addressed in the methodology section. Keep in mind that often it's best to include more information than not enough. You have to convince the reader that your measures are valid and reliable, that your methodology was rigorous, that is to say, scientific. You'll also need to explain how you conducted your data analysis. In other words, you're explaining when and how you used the data. You should aim to be as simple and clear as possible about your methodology. But above all, as we've emphasized before, the most important thing is to know your target journal and understand what they expect from you in this matter. Once you've worked through explaining your methodology, you then include the results section where you present your findings. Even if you're presenting a theoretical paper, you need to explain your analysis, what you bring to the table, the core of your paper. Once you've presented your results, you will then justify how your work contributes to the literature you referenced before in the literature review in a section usually called the discussion. This block of your paper is also extremely important. Basically, this is where you prove the relevance of your work. In a few words in the discussion section, you remind the reader of the research question. Then, you summarize the analysis, the results, the findings, and you explain how you're contributing and building upon previous literature. You're justifying in what sense you're bringing something new that sheds new light to the previous literature. As a reader goes through your paper, he or she may ask, what are the author's contributions? Sometimes these contributions have implications on research or on practice. Then you should make that explicitly clear. Finally, the last element of your paper is the conclusion. What form the conclusion takes can differ a lot depending on the journal and on your specific discipline. Sometimes the conclusion is where you show the limits of your work and how you're planning to address them in the future research. Sometimes it's just a short summary of your research question and all contributions. It really depends. In any case, the conclusion should be concise and powerful in case it's the only thing people read. Like several other pieces, we'll get back to that point in an upcoming lesson. The end of your paper will reference your bibliography, something else we will also address in another lesson. Also, some journals will want you to list all the tables, figures, and graphs after the text, or even in a separate file. So remember to read the journal's guide to authors carefully and make sure you're very familiar with what your specific journal expects, as we've mentioned several times before. The last things to be included at the end of your paper are any appendices, a certificate of copy editing, and those sorts of items. That wraps up this lesson. In case we haven't said it lately, thank you very much for working through this course, and know that we're wishing you good luck with your work. Stay tuned, our next lesson will spend some time looking at actually writing the paper.